Myst, the Book of Tiana, continues with part 5.4 as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the Plurality Report, who has decided to change his life completely and live with the seals on the cold northern islands of Svalbard and Spitsbergen. That evening, a warrant for Veovis's arrest was issued. Though the day was now advanced, Kavir still blazed with lights. Every room was lit, every lantern burned brightly. Men from both the city guard and the Guild of Maintainers were everywhere, in every room and every corridor. It was clear that a thorough search of the island had been undertaken. Climbing the great stairway at the heart of the rock, Atris began to wonder just what he had set in motion. It was true what people said about the messenger who brings ill news. Passing the entrance to the book room, Atris saw how armed teams of maintainer guards were waiting there, ready to link into the family ages. That, as much as anything, told him that they had not yet taken Veovis. So he is guilty, he thought, surprised despite all, for some small part of him still held that this was all a mistake and that an explanation would be found. But no. If Veovis was missing, then there could be but a single explanation. Master Jadaris was waiting for him in Lord Rakari's study, near the very top of the island mansion. It was a regular cave of a room. There were no windows. Instead, huge book-lined shelves filled every inch of the walls. "Ah, Atris," Jadaris said, looking up at him from behind the great desk. The linking book lay before him, open, the tiny panel glowing in the half-light of the room.
"We have searched high and low now, but there is no sign of Lord Veovis in Donny. In the circumstances, I have given the order for the family ages to be searched. That will happen now, but there is one other matter we must deal with."
Jadaris waved a hand over the linking book.
"A guildsman ventured in 4 hours back. He found another book at the foot of the slope. It linked back to this very room."
Atris nodded soberly. There was a moment's silence, and then Master Jadaris stood.
"So, Atris, would you like to link through with me?"
They linked to a cave on the eastern slope of a large mountainous island. A cluster of smaller islands surrounded it, linked by suspended wooden bridges. It was one of these that they finally found the two guildsmen, lying side by side in a hut, beside the cliff's edge, their hands and feet bound tight. They were long dead, their cloaks stiff with their own dried bloods, their throats slit from ear to ear. On the floor nearby was the dagger that had been used to kill them, lying beside its sheath as if abandoned. It was Veovis's weapon, one he had been seen to carry often. Atris saw how Jadaris stared at the dagger, saw the strange flicker in the muscles of his neck, the sudden change in his eyes, and knew that this had finally convinced him. These were his men who had been murdered, his young boys. To see them like this, trussed and butchered, had clearly shocked him deeply. As a team of maintainers arranged to bring the bodies back, Atris and Master Jadaris linked back to Kavir. There they were greeted by the news that Veovis had been taken in Nidur Gemat and was being held in the book room down below. They went down, Atris hanging back as Jadaris walked across to confront Veovis. Veovis's hands were bound behind his back. 2 guards, maintainers, stood to either side of him, yet Veovis seemed unrepentant. His head was raised defiantly, and his eyes burned with indignation. Jadaris held the sheathed dagger out before him.
"Is this yours, Master Veovis?"
"It is," Veovis said. "What of it?"
"You do not deny it, then?"
But Veovis seemed not to hear. He took a step toward Jaderis. "What have I done to deserve this treatment, Master Jaderis? Am I a common criminal, to be bound and herded like an animal?"
"We found the bodies,"
Jaderis said, but Veovis did not seem to be listening. "I am not normally an impatient man, but I warn you, guildsman, unbind me now, or you shall answer to my father." A shiver went through Jaderis.
"It was your father who ordered it."
Veovis fell silent. The words had taken him aback. "Impossible," he said. "He would never have given such an order."
"Never?"
Jaderis seemed to watch Veovis a moment. Then,
"Do you deny the charges?"
"Charges?" Veovis laughed coldly, then tilted his head slightly. His eyes were hostile now. "I do not understand you, Master Jaderis. Of what precisely am I charged?"
"Of trading in illicit ages, and of murder."
The look of shock in Veovis's face surprised Atris. For a moment, Veovis seemed unable to speak. Then he shook his head. But this is ridiculous! I have done nothing!"
"We have the proof,"
Jaderis said coldly.
"But I am not your judge, Veovis. At least, not alone."
Jaderis seemed to straighten, taking on his full authority, then spoke again.
"Guildmaster Veovis, you will be taken from this place to the guild fortress of Irat, where you will be held secure until a date is set for your trial."
"My trial?" Veovis's expression was one of sheer disbelief. Jaderis nodded, yet he seemed far from triumphant.
"This is a sad day for the guilds, Lord Veovis. You have brought great shame upon us, and even greater shame upon your father."
"But I have done nothing!" Jaderis glared at him.
"Nothing? You will be silent, Guildmaster, or I shall have you gagged."
Veovis blinked, astonished. His mouth opened, then snapped shut.
"Good,"
Jaderis said curtly.
"Now take him from here, before I am tempted to do to him what he did to those poor boys."
Atris returned home to find the blinds drawn, doctors hurrying to and fro. His mother, Tessera, greeted him in the hallway, her face gaunt, her eyes troubled. Gen had worsened, it seemed, and almost died. It was she who had finally called in the healers when all else seemed hopeless. Atris went through to the nursery, fearing the worst. Anna was sitting beside the cot, clearly exhausted, staring down at the feverish child as he lay there like a waxwork doll, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Nearby, a doctor spoke quietly, urgently to one of his colleagues, then, seeing Atris, came across.
"There's little we can do,"
he said sorrowfully.
"We have tried several remedies, but the child seems unable to keep anything in his stomach. I fear it is up to the Maker now."
Atris thanked the man, then went over and knelt beside Anna, resting his hand lightly on her knee. Tiana, it's Atris. I'm back." She turned her head slowly and looked down at him. "He's dying, Atris. Our son is dying." The desolation in her face was unlike anything he had ever seen. "No," he said softly. "He'll come through." But she was not to be consoled. "You did not hear him, Atris. The sounds he made. Such awful, dreadful sounds. And the spasms. Twice I thought I'd lost him." "Maybe," he said, "but he is still here." He took her hands and clenched them, looking up into her face. "Won't you fight for him, Tiana? Won't you help our son survive?" Anna closed her eyes, pained by his words. "I've tried, Atris. The Maker knows I've tried my best. But I am so tired now. So very, very tired." "Then rest, my love. It's my turn now." Atris stood, then, bending down, lifted Gen from the cot, holding him tightly, securely against his shoulder. The child whimpered a little, then settled against him. He was so light now. There was so very little of him. The lightest breeze would carry him off. Atris shuddered, filled with an ineffable tenderness for his infant son. "Come now, little one," he said softly as he carried him from the room. "Let us see what a little sunlight can do for you." Veilvis looked up from the summary document and sighed. It was lies, every word of it, yet even he could see how convincing a case Atris had made against him. If the five believed this, and why should they not, then he would be found guilty without a doubt. Swarnir. Swarnir was the key, but Swarnir could not be found. Veilvis's own statement lay on the desk beside his elbow, 6 pages in his own hand. At best it seemed naive, at worst a tissue of lies and excuses. He knew which his fellow guildsmen would think. They had let him see the evidence against him, the books and documents and letters, all of it written, or so it appeared, in his hand. Good forgeries they were, the best he had ever seen, but forgeries all the same, for he had not written a single word of what they had shown him. He had pointed the finger at Atris, but they had expected that. It was to be expected, after all. To humor him, and perhaps to mollify his father, they had even searched back in the guild records to see whether there might not be some earlier instance of such fraud, one that might be attributable to Atris, but there was nothing. Atris was a clever one, none cleverer. He played the honest man, but Veilvis knew better. He knew now what a snake Atris was. He heard the cell door open behind him, and turned to see a guard bring in a pile of clean clothes and place it on the bed in the far corner of the room. Another guard stood in the door, blocking it. The sight of it almost made him laugh, for it suggested that he might try to escape, and when did a Dawny Lord run from his fate? Veilvis turned back to the copy statement, then pushed it away from him. It was no use. There was no way he could answer this. It was like grasping at phantoms. He even understood it, now that he had had time to reflect upon it. How long had Atris prepared this, since he had refused to countenance the wedding, no doubt? Veilvis stood and stretched. Was that all Atris wanted, to bring him down, or was there more? Was there some further part he could not see? Veilvis crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside the pile of clothes. He felt weary now and in need of sleep. Too much had happened much too quickly. He reached out and picked up the pile of clothes, meaning to move it so that he could stretch out on the bed, but the pile was heavier than he had expected, strangely heavy, in fact. He put it down, then began to sort through it, his brows knitted. There! Halfway down the pile his fingers closed on something hard. A book! A leather-covered book! He drew it out and stared at it, amazed. There was no mistaking it. It was a linking book. He opened it. There, on the right-hand page, the tiny panel glowed invitingly. It was a trap. It had to be, or a test of some kind. He closed the book and set it down. A trap. Of course it was. But what if it was not? What if this was his father's doing? Veilvis stood, then closed his eyes, racked by indecision. This was his chance to prove himself an honest man. If he handed in the book... he groaned, then sat once more. Who was he fooling? They would find him guilty whatever. The evidence was too strong against him. And what then? 200 years he'd spend trapped on some hideous, tiny island on a prison age, watched every second of the day and night. The thought was unbearable. Opening the book again, he placed his hand against the panel and linked. Lord Rahira stepped into the empty cell and looked about him. The linking book lay on the bed where Veilvis had left it only a moment before. He stared at it, then shook his head. A while later, he heard a shout from farther down the hallway, a curse that turned into a groan. So now you know, Rahira, thought sadly. And what will that knowledge do to you, Veovis? The book had linked to an enclosed room on a different age, in which was a table. On that table was a second linking book and a tank of acid. It was a classic escape maneuver, and Veovis, naturally, had seen exactly what to do. But that second book linked right back to Donnie, to the interrogation cell at the end of the hallway, wherein sat Master Jadaris and his guards. Rahira sighed. Had Veovis known it was a test, or was this simply some final piece of arrogance on his part? He turned. Rakeri was standing in the doorway, his eyes dark with the knowledge of what his son had done. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, but Rakeri shook his head. "Do what you must," the old man said. "I wash my hands of him." Atris woke, not knowing where he was. It was bright, too bright to fully open his eyes. Gemidet. I must be on Gemidet. Squeezing his eyes shut again, he searched about him with his hand until his fingers closed upon his glasses. He pulled them on, then slowly opened his eyes again. The filters in the glass made the brightness bearable. It was morning, or maybe afternoon. How long had he slept? Then he remembered. Gen! He sat up, looking about him anxiously, then relaxed. Gen lay not 3 feet away from him, swaddled in a blanket where Atris had laid him last night. He lay there silently, his tiny glasses shielding his eyes against the light that shone in a broad band through the window just above them. Atris shuffled across, then picked up his baby son, cuddling him for a moment, then putting a hand lightly to his brow. The fever had passed. Gen stared back at him, curiously, his eyes placid, calm. Donnie eyes, for all the doctors said. "You came through," Atris said, smiling at him, proud suddenly of his son. "Look at you. There's nothing of you, Gen, yet you came through. You lived." There was a noise outside. Atris turned. Was it some forest animal sniffing about the camp? Then he heard the soft hum of Anna's voice and smiled. He stood, carrying the child out to her. She was standing with her back to him, looking out across the valley and the mist-wreathed waterfall. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching her, conscious of how the sunlight formed a shining wreath about her long, flowing hair. Then he spoke. "Tiana?" She turned, smiling at him. "I wondered when you would wake." "Look," he said, holding out Gen to her. "The fever's gone." "I know," she said, coming across and taking Gen from him. "I came in earlier and saw. I thought I'd let you both sleep." He looked up at the sky. The sun was sinking toward the west. "It's late," he said. "How long have we slept?" "A full day and more," she said, smiling broadly at him. "It clearly did you good." "Yes," he agreed. Then, as if suddenly recalling something, he laughed. "You know, I had a dream last night." "A dream?" She looked at him, intrigued. "What kind of dream? A pleasant one, I hope." He smiled. "Oh, yes. I dreamed we walked the tunnels to the surface, you and I, and Gen, and you took us to all of those places you have told me of in the past, even to Tajinar itself." "And the lodge?" "Yes," he nodded, staring out past her as if he really saw it. "I dreamed that we stayed there and that I sat there in the window with you, looking out across the desert. There was a full moon above us and the sky was full of stars. And Gen, I could hear Gen sleeping in the room behind us." "Maybe it will happen one day." "You think so?" She was quiet a moment, then, "I heard what happened with Veovis." "Ah," he nodded, then, "I do not know what to think, Tiana. The Veovis I knew would never have acted in such a fashion." "Yet people change." Atris looked directly at her. "Do they? I am not so sure, my love. What a man is, he is, though Veovis is no friend. I would yet trust him above many who call themselves my friend. And do you forget? He brought you home that time. But it was a common courtesy, was it? And yet that same man is charged with callously murdering 2 guildsmen. Do you really think him capable of that? Anna looked down, troubled. Of course. You have not heard, have you? Heard what? Beatrice asked. The 5 lords tested him, secretly gave him a linking book in his cell on Yarat. He took it and tried to escape. No honest man would do that, would they? Beatrice stared at her a moment, then looked down. So it is true, after all. It seems so. And Lord Rickeri, how has he taken the news? Badly, Anna said, rocking Gen gently. It appears he has taken to his bed. Some say he is dying. Beatrice looked down, touched deeply by the news. Then it is an ill day for Donny, he said quietly. An ill day indeed. The narrow streets leading to the great guild house were packed as the carriage carrying Veovis rattled through the gates, drawn by 2 great oxen. After 20 days of evidence, the council was to give their verdict. Never before had so high a public figure been on trial, and never for such heinous crimes. To trade in illicit books was bad enough, but to kill one's fellow guildsman, that was unheard of. And that was why they crowded into the narrow spaces between the great houses of the upper city, straining to get a glimpse of the villain of the piece, Veovis. Some saw him as a greedy man for whom great riches had never been enough. Others commented on his hypocrisy and saw his protestations of innocence in the face of such a weight of fact as a sure sign of his mental instability. This was the atmosphere in which Veovis stepped down from the carriage and, climbing the marble steps of the guild house, crossed the outer room and entered the great chamber to hear the verdict of his peers. A temporary gallery had been built at one end of the chamber especially for the occasion, a temporary affair that seated those few dozen guests who had been invited by the council to bear witness. Among these were the families of the 2 dead guildsmen, Agaris and Atrice's wife, Tiana. Anna was now a Donny citizen. In a private ceremony a week earlier, she had become by law what blood nor marriage could make her. It was a precedent, but one the council approved. But now the moment had come. As Veovis stepped out between the great doors, a silence fell over the great circular chamber. From their seats on the various levels, every member turned to look. Veovis had had his hair cut stubble short. He wore a simple one-piece of rust-red cloth. There were iron manacles about his wrists, linked by a short length of chain and manacles at both ankles, from which 2 fine steel chains led back into the hands of a maintainer guard, a big man, capable, it seemed, of holding back a team of horses. Even so, Veovis stood there a moment, with his head held high, his eyes as proud, as unbowed as an eagle's. Then he began to descend the steps, passing between the great pillars. Below Veovis, in the center of the chamber, stood the 5 great thrones of the 5 lords of Donny. But today only 4 of them were filled. As Veovis came to a halt in the space before them, the great lords stared at him like living statues, their dignity immense. There was a moment's silence, tense, expectant, and then Lord Rahira spoke. Guildsmen, have you decided? There was a resounding aye from all sides of the chamber. And your verdict? Guilty! 360 voices said as one. It was done. Veovis seemed to tremble, yet his head did not waver, nor did his eyes even show a flicker of regret. If anything, he seemed even more defiant than before. Rahira looked to him, his ancient eyes cold, no trace of compassion in them. Before I come to your sentence, is there anything you would like to say, Guildmaster Veovis? Veovis met the ancient's eyes, then shook his head. Very well. Then it is the decision of this house that you be stripped of all rank, and that from henceforth your membership of the guild be annulled. Further, you will be taken from here, and on the 17th hour, 15 days hence, will be transferred to a suitable prison age, to be held there for the remainder of your natural life. All eyes were on Veilvis. From her seat in the gallery, Anna saw how fine, how dignified he looked in this his final moment, and felt the slightest flicker of doubt cross her mind. Yet he was guilty. She had heard and seen enough these past 20 days to know that much. Glancing across, she saw how Agaris was leaning forward. What was that gleam in his eyes? Delight that justice had finally been done? Or was it simple gloating? She looked down briefly, a shiver of distaste running through her, then looked back, her eyes seeking out Atris, where he sat in the first row, just behind Veilvis. As Veilvis turned, preparing to climb the steps again and leave the chamber, he halted briefly, right in front of Atris, staring down at his once friend. Something seemed to be said, then walked on, his bare manacled feet climbing the stone, the big maintainer trailing behind. Anna waited as the great lords ended the session. Then, as the members began to stand, a great murmur of talk rising in the chamber, she hurried quickly down the steps. Atris was standing in the midst of a tiny group of other members. As she stepped into their circle, they broke off their animated discussion, bowing to her respectfully. "What did he say?" she asked, looking anxiously to Atris. He hesitated, conscious of the others listening. "Not here, Tiana." She frowned. "Did he threaten you?" Atris shook his head, but he was awkward now. Looking about him apologetically, he stepped across the circle and, taking Anna's arm, led her away. "Well," she asked when they were outside, out of the hearing of the others, "what did he say?" Atris turned from her, as if he could not face her. He seemed pale now, discomfited. "He blames me." "Is that what he said? That he blames you?" Atris shook his head. "Well, tell me, Atris, what did he say?" Atris turned, looking directly at her. "You should have let me fall." That's what he said. "But you are not to blame." "No, I wish I could believe that. At the end there, watching him, even after all that was said and shown, do you know what I thought? I thought he was innocent. That is what I thought. And yet I said I, with all the rest, and sent him to his rock." "Do you want to do something? To say something, perhaps, to the five?" He laughed bitterly. "What could I say? No, I must live with this, Tiana, knowing I might have been wrong. Yes, and knowing that I was the one who set the wheels in motion, those great wheels of the Dawny state that can crush a man as easily as our great hammers pound the rock." They stood there a moment, silent, staring at each other, and then Anna took his arm and led him out. Yet even as they stepped out beneath the massive arch at the front of the guild house, the great bell on Agura began to sound, sending its sonorous tones across the cavern. Lord Rickeri was dead.